So what are we going to do? From September 2012, big focus on registration. That's got a new element to it. Not only will we use registration to keep out those who are patently not suitable to look after children, that we get through our checking process, but we are also aiming to keep out those who are not yet ready to care for children. That particularly affects childminders who up until the present have been able to register without doing any training, and in future they won't be able to register until they've completed training. But nevertheless, the interviews at registration will focus very much on the educational programmes and how people intend to deliver those from the first day that they open. And that will affect some of you in this room if you go forward for that registration. Along with the EYFS allowing more flexibility, we are going to allow more autonomy to all of you to manage your services in the way that you want, and we're going to do that by two main means. The first one is we are taking off everybody's conditions of registration. The earliest foundation stage sets out the requirements everybody should meet. You don't need Ofsted to tell you how many children you can have, because the earliest foundation stage sets out the ratios you need to have, the qualifications your staff need to have, the space you need to have for particular numbers of children. So we're handing that back to you to be able to shape your service in line with those requirements of the EYFS. We're not just opening the doors and saying you can now have as many children as you like. You must do it within those requirements, but it will enable you to react much more quickly to changes in your child population, and particularly around the free entitlement for 2-year-olds. It will enable you to shift your numbers and your ratios to take on children who might come to you without having to inform the regulator. The only difference to that is if you do build a new room and it affects the space you've got, you have to still notify us about that type of change. But we won't be telling you in that, well, that means you can have X number of extra children. That's for you to work out and decide yourselves. So that's quite a big change. I think it's probably a welcome one. It saves us huge amounts of administration. But I think it's in the spirit of the deregulation agenda and allowing people to manage services better themselves. The second bit of that is managers. Ofsted was tasked with continuing to check managers and decide on their suitability from 2005 when we stopped checking staff. We think that is a fairly odd thing for the regulator to do. It interferes with the employment decision. We think that is best placed with employers to make that decision. So employers in future will check managers, will decide on their suitability, and we will check those recruitment procedures at registration or inspection in much the way that we do now with other staff. So some fairly big changes there in terms of regulation. We will of course continue to use our enforcement powers if people aren't complying with that, so it's not giving you a free hand. And the final aspect of changes to the sort of regulation bit of it is we'll carry out full inspections where we get concerns that those aren't minor and we're pushing them out to you, instead of carrying out investigations. And that will result in a full published report on our website, rather than just the outcome summary that sits there now. So that allows us to set that concern in the context of the overall quality of the provision, rather than just singling it out as a separate matter. And I think that is probably fairer all round to yourselves and to parents who may be choosing that provision. Inspection has got some quite big changes in it. The focus of inspection is very much on children's all-round development and the progress that they make in their learning. There's a focus on how different groups of children make progress. Inspection at the moment has tended very much to focus on how children are when they leave the setting, the progress children have made overall and what they are like when they are moving out at the end of that. These inspections will focus very much on what it's like for children at different ages. So if you have children from babies right through to 5, there will be as much focus on the babies as there will on the 3 and 4-year-olds. And reports will reflect that. And a particular focus on 2-year-olds where you take the free entitlement. The government is keen to know its money is being spent wisely. The effectiveness of the leadership and management, some quite big changes there. Very much a focus on how leaders and managers monitor the quality of practice in the provision, how they have a handle on the quality of their staff, how they have a handle on the delivery of the educational programmes, how they know assessment is consistent between different staff groups, and how they are promoting the professional development of staff to stamp out that sort of mediocrity that the Chief Inspector so dislikes. Meeting the safeguarding and welfare requirements is part of that leadership and management judgment, but a much less focus on that, where we have no reason to believe people aren't meeting those safeguarding and welfare requirements. Self-evaluation, continuing with self-evaluation, it's really important, even if you don't use the Ofsted form, the inspector will want to know how you are self-evaluating, how you're using that to bring about improvement in your provision. Current self-evaluation form will shut down in the last week in August, and we'll start with a new one against the new judgments towards the end of September. All of the text from your old one, if you've used it, will be moved into the new one. We're not expecting you to have done your self-evaluation against the new inspection judgments right away. Inspectors will look at your self-evaluation in whatever form you have it. It doesn't have to be against those new judgments. You won't be penalised in any way if you haven't done that one. Retaining the 4-grade system, I've already talked about that. These are the judgments inspectors will make. There will only be 4 judgments in the new inspections. An overall effectiveness of judgment, and 3 other judgments that contribute towards that. These are the judgments that are set out in legislation that we must always make, and we've just pulled back to the 4 judgments that we must make. So the first one about how well the provision meets the needs of the children who attend is where we'll look at children's learning and development and the quality of practice, how practitioners work with those children. The second one about children's well-being is looking more at how care practices support children in making strong emotional attachments, how it supports their personal and social development, and how that helps them to acquire skills as learners. And effectiveness of leadership and management. I've just talked about that one and how that might change. So just those 3 judgments contributing to the overall effectiveness one. So gone are those days where we sort of pick out little bits and make a little judgment about everything. There's 4 big judgments now.